So catch me up to speed on the hospice piece, because obviously you mentioned in the first segment about how that almost got you into writing, right? And so when you were working in California in hospice, you were working during a time in this country when AIDS was starting to unfold, and a lot of people didn't know anything about it. It was really undiagnosed, wasn't it?
Yes.
At the time. And so what was that experience like?
Well, that's a really good question, because one of the reasons I think I went into hospice or was drawn to it was I had an experience as a nursing student being on the floor at UCLA, and I had a patient that I was supposed to take care of, and at that time they didn't know what AIDS was, didn't know what was going wrong with all these mostly young men at that time, very healthy young men until that point, coming in very, very sick. And I remember the emergency team bringing in a young man wrapped in tinfoil, because they didn't know they were afraid to touch him. They were afraid that they just didn't know what it was. And so it was extremely disturbing to me. And everybody, was scared to go in the room, and it was, did you have to wear gloves and gown and all, just, it seemed really inhumane. Very impersonal for a person who was so scared, and so sick. And so really, after I finished nursing school, I worked briefly in the hospital and then went into, community health hospice work. And for me, that was just a really powerful time to be able to work with the community down there, people who were, suffering at home. It allowed them to stay home, allowed them to be with their loved ones and their friends and their community. And for me, that was really fulfilling.
So were you specializing kind of in helping with hospice, helping people who had AIDS?
I think it turned out that the area that I was working in West LA and Santa Monica kind of area, and so there was a larger population. At one point I also was working at the same time with older people in the Fairfax district, which is a really strong Jewish population. And so it was really culturally fantastic to be able to go, to meet these different groups and people and help them out. So.
How did you reconcile that fear of sort of the unknown of the disease and stuff at that point when you were around people that were dying from it?
I think by the time that, do you mean as far as a fear or a worry or something like that?
Yeah, concern, maybe for your own, like, could I contract this somehow in those years when things were so, is it airborne? Is it really undetermined?
I think by the time I actually got out and was helping in people's homes, they did have some sense that there was,
you couldn't just catch it.
Exactly.
Okay. So how did those experiences in your life play into what you do with hospice and your nursing career up here in the Gorge?
I think that, again, the similarity is people are people. And really a lot of people, how they live, it sounds cliche, you hear it a lot, how people live is often how they die. If they've been scared and fearful, they may approach death in that same way. If they've been a person who's really open and exploring, that may be what, how they approach those last days and times. And it's a real, I think of as a sacred time, and so as a nurse to be able to be part of that, I think it's also the connection that I feel as a writer on some level, that you get to come into situations, circumstances that the average person isn't just able to invite themselves into. As a nurse, you can call on the phone and say, I'd like to come see you, and you drop into their life and their house and their family. And as a writer, you drop into, hi, can I just come ask you some really personal questions, about how you see the world? And 99 times out of 10, 100 people say yes, come and are great about telling me stories.
Is there something that really stands out in your mind, like a story that somebody told you or something that they said or a remark they made that just really stands out and really spoke to you?
I think, one of the people that I met, it was a professor actually who lived in Berkeley, and his wife was taking care of him, and he had been diagnosed with a type of cancer that was very short-lived. He had a very short prognosis, just a number of weeks. And yet he was in pretty good shape to be able to talk and all that. And she had pulled me aside, and she had cut his hair that day. And she had taken the little curls from the back of his hair and put them in a scrapbook so that she would remember what his hair felt like.
Oh, wow.
And then she asked me, and she had, been journaling and writing down all these different things that day to day, just what their common experiences were. And then she said to me, do you think while you're here it would be okay if I went for a walk around the block? I haven't been out of the house since he was diagnosed, and I've just been too scared that something might happen. But while you're here, is it okay if I just, take a walk? That's the way I cope with my stress. So it was probably a year later that I got the idea for a story, and I wrote it from a woman's perspective who knew that her husband was dying. And the crux of the story was really her coming to the realization that her life would go on after his death, after their marriage was over, after he died, that there would come a time where there was some happiness in her life again.
Yeah. Do you happen to know how her life has played out since?
I don't. I think of her often.
Yeah. I wonder. Does she know that the story was in any way paralleled some of the experiences you had with
I don't think
her
so.
and her husband?
Yeah, I mean, I never connected with her again to be able to tell her.
Huh.
Yeah.
So tell me a bit about hospice and the role hospice plays is end-of-life care. So tell me what that looks like and what your part in all of that and your role that you play within that whole setting.
Okay. Well, people can receive hospice care at home. A lot of the people that I saw were at home, also in nursing homes or assisted living, that kind of thing. And it's really dealing with the body, mind, and spirit of someone. So it's to help them continue to live as much as they possibly can, within the limits of their physical disease. And so as a nurse, I would go in and visit them and find out, whether it was pain or symptom control that they were having issues with, whether it was feeling that they had a son or a daughter that they didn't know how to tell, or some conflict in the family. All those kinds of things come up.
That's a really important thing that I had actually never even thought of, was the family, as far as maybe telling the family. And yeah, that makes a lot of sense. How do you guys go about facilitating that?
It's, well, the good thing about hospice is it's a real team approach. So it's not just a nurse. There's usually a medical social worker who's really, skilled in being able to help facilitate those conversations and get people resources to help them care for someone at home or, in a nursing home. And there's also usually a chaplain on the team. So whether someone has a religious affiliation or not, that's also another person who's a great person to have a conversation with, and just some of that sharing. And then they have home health aides who can help with some of the physical care that just gets really hard for especially older spouses or a child, an adult child who may not feel comfortable doing that kind of thing for a parent, a grandparent.
Well, very important stuff, and we'll continue the conversation after the break. So you guys stick with us. We'll be right back.
When we return,
it's worked lifestyle-wise. It's worked really great to couple with my writing and my family life. So that's been really nice. This summer I'm looking forward to getting a little deeper into writing projects because I have the summers off.